In the last 250 years, 3 governments thought they were unshakable. All 3 were wrong. France in 1789 was the cultural capital of Europe. Within a decade, its king's head was in a basket and mobs were cheering under a falling blade. Russia in 1917 controlled 1/6 of the planet's land. Within a year, its emperor was shot in a basement with his children and buried in an unmarked grave. Cuba in the 1950s was a playground for the rich with casinos, beaches, and American money pouring in. Within a few years, people were fleeing on boats to escape the very government they helped bring to power. 3 different centuries, 3 different ideologies, 3 different continents. And yet, when you strip away the flags and slogans, they all followed the same hidden script. Here's the part nobody really wants to think about. Right now, in 2025, the United States is walking down that same road. Not at the beginning, not in theory, right in the middle. You feel it in your own life long before you see it on the news. Groceries that used to cost $80 now cost $140. You scroll rental listings and realize your parents bought a whole house for less than your annual rent. Your raise is 3%. Your cost of living jumps 12%. You work, you budget, you cut back, and somehow, you're still falling behind. You watch politicians shout on TV while nothing changes. You see headlines about record corporate profits while your savings account is a joke. You hear about the strong economy, but it doesn't feel strong in your kitchen, at your gas pump, in your inbox when the rent reminder hits. Deep down, something feels off. Not just times are tough, more like the system itself is quietly breaking. If you've ever had that feeling, here's the uncomfortable truth. History says you're not crazy. You're early. Because revolutions do not appear out of thin air. They don't start with a single protest or a single election or a single bad leader. They build like pressure inside a boiler. Slow, invisible, relentless. And then one day, something tiny, one more tax, one more scandal, one more spark hits a system that's already soaked in gasoline. That's when the explosion looks sudden. But the fuse was burning for years. Here's the strange part. If you rewind France, Russia, and Cuba in slow motion and watch their final decades, you see the same pattern repeat, almost beat for beat. The same social tension, the same economic squeeze, the same collapse of trust, and finally, the same violent snap when people decide the system won't fix itself. It's not random. It's not bad luck. It's a 6-stage cycle, a predictable revolution pattern that starts quietly with inequality and ends loudly with chaos. A pattern that has already toppled monarchies, empires, and modern states. A pattern that does not care what flag you fly or which party you support. And here's where it gets personal. This isn't just a history lesson. Every stage of this pattern shows up in your bank account, your rent, your job security, your sense of safety. When a society moves deeper into the cycle, regular people pay the price first. Not the billionaires, not the lobbyists, not the talking heads on cable news.
It's the middle-class parent who watches property taxes rise while the local school gets worse. The young couple who cannot buy a home because hedge funds can. The worker who gets laid off while executives collect bonuses for cost-cutting. What if the rising anger you see online isn't just politics? What if the culture war, the protests, the conspiracy theories, the street clashes left and right, are all surface symptoms of a much deeper disease? What if your lifetime is lining up with the same 6-stage revolution cycle that tore apart France, Russia, and Cuba? That's the promise of this story. Not fear for fear's sake, but clarity. We're going to walk through the pattern, stage by stage. We're going to see how each revolution began long before the first shot was fired. We're going to see how ordinary people were slowly pushed from frustration to bitterness, to the belief that only destruction could bring change. And then we're going to hold that pattern up to America in 2025 like a mirror, not to predict the exact date of a collapse, but to answer a harder question. Where are we on the cycle, and how much time do we really have before the math of history takes over? Because if France, Russia, and Cuba all crashed after passing the same checkpoints, and if the United States has already passed 4 of them, then this isn't about whether you like the current president or which party you vote for. It's about whether your kids grow up in a country that reforms or a country that explodes. 3 revolutions, 6 stages, The same invisible machine running in the background every time. And once you see how it works, you can't unsee it. The pattern always begins the same way. Quietly, almost politely. The kind of danger that doesn't look like danger until it suddenly is. History's revolutions don't start with gunfire or riots. They start with a math problem. A slow, grinding imbalance between what people expect and what their reality delivers. And when that imbalance grows wide enough, long enough, deep enough, the six-stage revolution cycle snaps into place like gears in an ancient machine. Stage 1, extreme wealth inequality. Not just rich people exist. Human societies have always had rich people. This stage begins when everyday workers look upward and feel something new, not envy, but insult. A sense that the game is fixed, that someone took more than their share, that the ladder they were promised has been quietly pulled away. Stage 1 doesn't create a revolution, but it sets the emotional voltage. It loads the battery. Then comes Stage 2, ferment corruption and incompetence. This is the point where people realize the referee isn't neutral anymore. When leaders stop solving problems and start performing on television. When the laws apply differently depending on your wealth, your connections, your usefulness. When the system stops being a system and starts being a stage. At this point, the pressure inside society heats up, but it's still containable until the most dangerous shift of all arrives. Stage 3, the middle class radicalizes. This is the hinge of the entire pattern. Revolutions don't begin with the poor. The poor are too busy surviving. Revolutions ignite when the educated, the skilled, the taxpayers, the working professionals, the very people who are supposed to believe in the system lose faith. When teachers, lawyers, engineers, managers, veterans, and young graduates look at the future and see nothing, no path upward, no stake in the game, no reason to defend a system that will not defend them. This is where the cycle flips from frustration to danger. Once the middle class turns, the countdown begins. Slow at first, then accelerating. Stage 4, loss of faith in institutions. This is where France's Estates General collapsed, where Russia's soldiers refused to fire on civilians, where Cuba's elections became a joke. It's also where modern societies begin to fracture into parallel realities. Two groups watching the same event and seeing two different universes. Two Americas under one flag. Two interpretations of truth. Long legitimacy. Stage 4 is the point where the glue starts to melt. Elections no longer settle arguments. Courts no longer settle disputes. Police no longer command trust. Media no longer commands belief. Everything becomes contested. Everything becomes political. Everything becomes a battlefield. And once you arrive here, you are no longer approaching revolution. You are already walking inside it. But then comes the part that shocks even people who've studied this cycle for decades. Because Stage 5 doesn't rise slowly. It hits like a thunderclap. Stage 5. Revolutionary movements gain mass support. This is where fringe ideas stop being fringe. Where the extremes left or right suddenly become the only voices people trust. Moderates fade. Compromises die. Rage becomes currency. Burn it down becomes a plan. Stage 5 is the moment when society stops arguing about policies and starts arguing about regime change. And then, after months or years of accelerating tension, a spark hits the powder. Stage 6. Government overthrown, chaos follows. The cycle ends where every revolution ends, not with reform, with prosperity, but with collapse, violence, power grabs, economic freefall, and eventually new form of authoritarian control rising from the wreckage. That's the six-stage pattern. The oldest, most reliable political algorithm in human history. The one France followed, the one Russia followed, the one Cuba followed, and the one America, right now, 2025, is marching through, step by step. But here's the twist. Here's the part nobody wants to admit out loud. The United States isn't entering this cycle. It's already inside it, deep inside it. And once you see how perfectly each stage maps onto the world around you, you'll understand why the next few years may define not just the country, but your job, your savings, your safety, your future. France didn't fall in a weekend. Russia didn't explode in a month. Cuba didn't flip in a single speech. Each collapse felt sudden only to the people who weren't paying attention. But when you rewind the timeline, slow the tape down, you see the exact same emotional sequence building like pressure under a steel lid. France, 1789. The richest culture in Europe. The center of philosophy, science, art, diplomacy. A kingdom that looked immortal, but beneath the powdered wigs and palace chandeliers, the foundation was rotting. For decades, the elites lived in a reality so detached from the population that they might as well have been living on another planet. 1.5% of the population paid no taxes. Everyone else, 26 million workers, peasants, small merchants, carried the entire state on their backs. Bread was nearly 90% of a worker's daily budget. A single bad harvest doubled prices. Families starved while the nobility threw parties lit by 2,000 candles and served meals that required 10 cooks. France had triggered stage 1 long before the first protest sign ever appeared. Extreme wealth inequality wasn't a statistic. It was a humiliation. Then came stage 2. Louis XVI wasn't evil. He was weak, dangerously weak. Instead of reforming the system, he borrowed more, taxed more, delayed more, and hoped the problem would magically fix itself. Powerful nobles blocked every attempt to fix the budget. Clergy refused to be taxed. The government collapsed into paralysis. By 1789, the system wasn't corrupt on the edges, it was incompetent at the core. Stage 3 detonated when lawyers, merchants, and educated citizens finally snapped. They formed the National Assembly, swore the tennis court oath, and declared the kingdom illegitimate. This wasn't the poor rising up. This was the middle class, the backbone of the country, saying, "We're done." And then stage 4. Storming of the Bastille. The crowd didn't attack the largest fortress. They attacked the one symbol everyone recognized, the place where the king's authority lived. Once that symbol fell, every institution weakened. The courts, the church, the monarchy itself. Trust evaporated. Fear rose. That's when stage 5 sprinted into view. Radicals like Robespierre promised purity, justice, equality. The people, starving, angry, exhausted, believed him. When moderates failed to deliver, extremists take the stage. Always. From there, the cycle ended the same way it always ends. Stage 6. The king beheaded. Political opponents executed. A 10-year nightmare of chaos, famine, and war. Ending not with freedom, but with Napoleon's dictatorship. France followed every step of the pattern like a melody. But the truly frightening part, Russia followed the exact same tune, just at a different tempo. Russia, 1917. An empire so massive it needed multiple time zones to function. A dynasty that had ruled for 3 centuries. A military with millions of soldiers. But wealth inequality was medieval. Nobles owned everything. Peasants owned nothing. Workers labored 12 to 14-hour days for pennies. Children worked in factories. Safety regulations didn't exist. Stage 1 was baked into the national DNA, a powder keg with no ventilation. Then stage 2 arrived wearing a crown. Nicholas I, the last Tsar, believed he ruled by divine right. He ignored workers' demands. He dismissed advisors. He trusted mystics over generals. When peaceful protesters marched in 1905, asking for food and basic rights, the Imperial Guards fired on them. Bloody Sunday shattered any remaining faith in the government. Stage 3 surged when the middle class and soldiers turned their backs. Soldiers refused orders. Workers walked out. Even conservative lawmakers demanded reform. Then stage 4 snapped into place with terrifying speed. World War I exposed the regime's incompetence. Millions of soldiers died. Russia ran out of ammunition. Entire divisions surrendered without firing a shot. When the army won't defend the government dies. Nicholas abdicated. 3 centuries of empire ended in a whisper. But the provisional government that replaced him made one fatal mistake. It stayed in the war. That vacuum pulled in stage 5. Lenin, the Bolsheviks. A disciplined, organized, ideologically hardened revolutionary movement that promised 3 simple things: peace, land, bread. It was the perfect slogan for a collapsing society. Clear, emotional, everything the current government couldn't provide. They seized power in a nearly bloodless coup, and then unleashed one of the bloodiest civil wars in modern history. Stage 6 arrived drenched in violence. 10 million dead. The royal family executed. Villages wiped out. The birth of a regime that would kill millions more. Under Stalin, Russia followed the same six-stage pattern as France, but on a grander, darker scale. And then came the third example, the cautionary tale with the most modern feel. Cuba, 1959. Not an ancient empire, not a medieval monarchy, a modern, tropical, highly developed society. Tourism booming, American investment everywhere, casinos, nightlife, beaches, wealth. But again, stage 1. Wealth was concentrated in Havana. Batista's loyalists lived in luxury. American corporations owned the land. Meanwhile, rural Cubans lived with no schools, no health, no future. Stage 2 was Batista's corruption. Rigged elections, torture, secret police, a government that ruled for profit, not people. Stage 3 came when a young lawyer, Fidel Castro, declared the system illegitimate. Students followed him. Professionals followed him. People who should have been the future of the country turned against it. Stage 4 escalated when the military lost legitimacy. Every act of brutality created new rebels. Every village burned, created new fighters. Every student arrested created new martyrs. Stage 5 surged as Castro became a symbol of justice. Not because people loved communism, but because they hated Batista more. And Stage 6 landed with fireworks. Batista fled with millions in stolen cash. Castro seized power. He promised democracy. He delivered a dictatorship that lasted 6 decades. 3 countries, 3 eras, 3 cultures, one identical 6-stage pattern. And every time, the people in power said the same sentence you hear in America today. It can't happen here, but it did. Again and again. And the United States, in 2025, is mirroring the exact same emotional, economic, and political buildup that triggered every one of those collapses. In the United States right now, the warning signs aren't subtle. They're not hidden. They're not buried in obscure reports or academic papers. They're sitting in your living room, on your paycheck, in your rent invoice, in every conversation where someone says, "I don't trust any of them anymore." If you've ever wondered why the country feels like it is splitting along invisible fault lines, here's the answer nobody in power wants you to see. America has already passed the first 4 stages of the revolution cycle, not approaching them, not flirting with them, already inside them. And each stage maps onto modern America with mathematical precision. Stage 1: extreme wealth inequality. In 1980, the top 1% controlled about 8% of the nation's wealth. Today, over 32, a level higher than France right before 1789. And the top 1, about 130,000 households now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. That's 130,000 families outweighing 117 million American households. You don't need a PAAHDAADDDDHEHE to see what that means in real life. Luxury towers rising over homeless encampments. Yachts launched while parents debate skipping meals to buy groceries. Billionaires flying to space, while millions can't afford a dentist. Inequality doesn't cause revolution by itself, but it sets the emotional charge. And in America, that charge is fully loaded. Stage 2: government corruption and incompetence. France had nobles blocking reforms. Russia had a czar living in fantasy. Cuba had a dictator selling the country for cash. America? Congress trading stocks on inside information. Lobbyists writing the laws. Billion-dollar corporations paying zero taxes. Presidents under constant criminal investigation. Supreme Court justices embroiled in scandals. Trust in Congress has collapsed to about 15%. Trust in the Supreme Court is sliding toward historic lows. And half the country believes every major election is rigged no matter who wins. A government people don't respect becomes a government people stop obeying. And that's when Stage 3 begins to boil. Stage 3: the middle class is being destroyed and radicalized. This is the hinge of the entire cycle, and it's the stage America has been accelerating through for 2 decades. Wages are flat, housing costs are absurd, healthcare is bankrupting families, college is a lifetime debt sentence, young professionals can't buy homes, can't start families, can't escape debt. The people who were supposed to inherit the American dream, the teachers, nurses, mechanics, engineers, veterans, college grads, feel like they were handed a bill instead. When the middle class loses hope, society loses stability. Always, every time. And in America, the middle class isn't just frustrated, it's furious. It's burned out. It's exhausted from trying to run a race where the finish line keeps moving farther away. That leads directly into the stage America is standing in right now. Stage 4: loss of faith in institutions. This is the stage that precedes the explosion. This is the point where the glue melts. France had the Estates General collapse. Russia had soldiers mutiny. Cuba had rigged elections everyone ignored. America, it has something far more complex and far more dangerous. A complete fracture in shared reality. Half the country believes the 2020 election was stolen. The other half believes January 6th was an attempted coup. Each side sees the other as the existential threat, not opponents, enemies. Trust in media is gone. Trust in law enforcement is fractured. Trust in elections is shattered. Trust in courts is evaporating. Every institution that once stabilized America, from government to journalism, education, is now seen as partisan, corrupt, or illegitimate. And when people stop believing the system can fix itself, they stop trying to fix it. They start looking for something or someone outside the system. That is the threshold between stage 4 and stage 5. And America is standing right on that line. Here's the part that keeps historians awake at night. Stage 5 doesn't drift in slowly. It erupts, and the early signs are already blinking. On the left, rising voices argue the system must be torn down, wealth redistributed, and capitalism rebuilt from the ashes. On the right, rising voices call for a strongman, emergency powers, and the suspension of norms to restore order. Two extreme visions, both gaining energy, both building loyal followings, both convinced the other side wants to destroy the country. Once either side reaches critical mass, stage 5 slams into place. And stage 6? That's the chapter nobody wants to read. But the math of this pattern says something brutally simple. Once a society reaches stage 4, once institutions lose legitimacy, once the middle class stops believing, once extremes become louder than moderates, the final 2 stages don't take decades. They take years, sometimes months. America is not immune. America is not too strong. America is not too stable. France thought the same thing. Russia thought the same thing. Cuba thought the same thing. Every nation believes it is the exception until the pattern proves otherwise. And right now, the pattern is whispering a message that should chill every American. You're already deeper into the cycle than you realize. Here's the truth most people avoid because it feels too heavy to carry. Revolutions don't begin with a single event. They begin with a mood, a vibration, a shift deep inside society's emotional core. And in America right now, that mood is unmistakable. People aren't just disagreeing, they're detaching. Not just angry disillusion, not just frustrated done. That's the final warning sign before stage 5 takes form. Because stage 5 is not about politics. It's about identity, survival, and belonging. Every revolution in history reached stage 5 the moment a critical mass of people said, I don't care what the law says anymore. I don't care what the courts decide. I don't care what the experts claim. I don't care what the other side thinks. I only trust my group. That shift is already happening in America publicly, loudly, and faster than most people want to admit. On one side, millions believe the wealthy stole the future, corporations hijacked the government, and the system must be burned down to be rebuilt. On the other side, millions believe America has been taken hostage by corrupt elites, captured institutions, and political enemies who cannot be negotiated with. Both sides believe they are defending the country. Both sides believe the other side is destroying it. Both sides see themselves as the patriots. Both sides see the other as the villain. This is how stage 5 begins in every historical example, not with victory, with polarization so sharp that compromise becomes betrayal. Moderates become irrelevant. Centrist ideas lose oxygen. People start choosing sides the way they choose survival strategies. In France, the Jacobins didn't rise because everyone wanted radicalism, they rose because moderates failed to solve anything. The people didn't want extremism, they wanted someone, anyone, who promised to break the deadlock. In Russia, Lenin didn't gain power because the country loved Marxism. He gained power because he offered what the government couldn't: peace, land, bread, simple solutions in a world that felt hopeless. In Cuba, Castro didn't win because millions dreamed of communism. He won because Batista's brutality left people starving for change, any change. That's exactly how stage 5 takes shape. Not through logic, through desperation. And here's the part Americans need to hear clearly. Stage 5 does not require a majority. It only requires the collapse of the middle. When the moderate center shrinks, the fringes grow. When common ground disappears, political gravity pulls people outward. And when the extremes gain momentum, they reshape the entire landscape. You can already see the ground shifting. Online communities organizing large-scale protests. Militia groups on both sides growing faster than law enforcement can track. Politicians running on openly extreme platforms and winning. Millions of Americans saying publicly that civil conflict is inevitable. Record gun sales. Record political donations. Record distrust. Record anger. And here's the strangest part. Most people don't even realize they've mentally relocated from fix the system to replace the system. But the emotional math reveals it clearly. When half the country believes the government is illegitimate, when the other half believes democracy itself is compromised, when no institution is trusted by more than 40% of the population, when both sides believe the next election could destroy the country, you're no longer in a functioning society. You're in a pre-revolution society. That's the psychological reality of stage 5 forming in real time. And if you want to understand what stage 6 looks like, the part nobody wants to imagine, you only need to follow the pattern forward, exactly as France, Russia, and Cuba did. Stage 6 isn't abstract. It isn't theoretical. It isn't cinematic. It's brutal. It's chaotic. And once it begins, it's almost impossible to stop. Here's the quiet, chilling truth history teaches. Revolutions aren't won by the people who start them. They're won by the people willing to do what others won't. The most extreme, the most ruthless, the most violent. In stage 6, the center disappears entirely. Police split into factions. Military units fracture. Governors defy federal orders. States challenge federal authority. Supply chains break. Banks freeze withdrawals. Foreign powers interfere from the shadows. And ordinary people, families, workers, homeowners are caught in the crossfire of a failing system. France lost 40,000 people in the terror. Russia lost 10 million in its civil war. Cuba lost its freedom for 60 years. No country believes it can collapse until it does. And no country ever recognizes stage 6 when it begins, only when it's too late to avoid. But here's the thread running through every revolution, including the one America may be drifting toward. Revolutions don't start because people want chaos. They start because people lose faith that their leaders will fix anything. Because they feel abandoned, unheard, squeezed, ignored. Because the system feels like a locked door with no key. That's the real engine of collapse. Not ideology, but hopelessness. And right now, hopelessness is the most bipartisan feeling in America. What happens next will depend on one thing: whether America finds a way to rebuild trust before stage 5 crystallizes, or whether the math of history continues to tighten its grip. Because the pattern isn't a prediction. The pattern is a warning, a mirror, a map written by centuries of collapse. And if the United States keeps following it step by step, the final chapters will write themselves. Every revolution ends the same way. It begins not with slogans or marches or political speeches, but with the simple, chilling realization that spreads quietly through a nation: this isn't working anymore. That sentence has toppled empires. It has ended dynasties. it has rewritten borders. And once enough people believe it at the same time, the six-stage cycle completes itself with mathematical certainty. That's why the final part of this story isn't just about collapse. It's about consequence, and the uncomfortable truth that America is now living inside the same emotional weather pattern that drowned France, Russia, and Cuba. Because here's the deeper lesson history teaches. Revolutions aren't explosions, they're verdicts. A society's final judgment about its own system. And right now, America is standing in that courtroom, the jury already whispering. But here's the twist nearly every historian misses. Collapse isn't the biggest danger. What replaces the collapse is. France didn't fall into freedom, it fell into the terror. Russia didn't fall into equality, it fell into dictatorship. Cuba didn't fall into justice, it fell into repression. Every revolution ends with the same paradox. The people who promise salvation take power during chaos, and then use the chaos as justification to never give that power back. That's why stage 6 is not the conclusion, it's the point where a nation becomes something unrecognizable. So what would that look like in America? Not the Hollywood version. Not a single battlefield. Not a dramatic, one-day collapse. History suggests something far more chaotic and far more personal. A slow unraveling, a grinding conflict, a period where institutions stop functioning, where states go their own way, where trust evaporates completely, where rumors carry more weight than laws, where survival becomes local instead of national, where the country keeps its name, but loses its meaning. You don't need imagination to picture it. Just look around. States already defy federal rulings. Governors already talk about secession. Millions already believe civil conflict is inevitable. Social media accelerates rage faster than governments can comment. America is not entering unfamiliar terrain, it's entering the terrain every collapsing society passes through. But here's the part that matters most. History is not a prophecy. It's a pattern. Patterns can be followed or broken. That's the final message hidden inside this cycle. Revolution is not fate, it's momentum. And momentum can still be redirected, but not by ignoring the danger or pretending the pattern isn't real. Because the truth is painfully simple. A nation survives when its people believe tomorrow will be better. A nation collapses when its people believe tomorrow will be worse. Right now, America is split between those two futures. Not red versus blue, not left versus right, but belief versus despair, hope versus exhaustion. The next chapter depends entirely on which emotion grows faster. If Americans rebuild trust slowly, painfully, deliberately, the cycle can still be interrupted. If Americans retreat deeper into anger and tribal loyalty, the cycle will accelerate. That's the razor's edge the country is standing on. And that's why understanding the pattern matters. Not to sensationalize the future, but to recognize the present for what it truly is. A crossroads moment in the life of the world's most powerful nation. Two paths lie ahead. One path leads to reform, renewal, and a difficult but possible rebuilding of trust. The other leads to France's terror, Russia's purges, Cuba's long night, different details, same destination. History is not warning America because it hates America. History is warning America because it has seen this movie too many times. And every time, the characters say the same line right before the screen goes dark. We never thought it could happen here, but the truth is it can. It has. And unless something changes soon, it will. If this opened your eyes, pay attention to the world around you with fresh clarity. Because when stage 5 begins, when the movements grow louder, when the center evaporates, when the extremes start pulling the country apart, you'll want to understand the forces shaping every headline, every election, every crisis. The answers aren't hidden in the future. They're written in the pattern. They're etched in the past. And now, they're unfolding in real time.